For some reason, and there is a reason, we know that. We don't know it, but there is one reason that after 6 months of hiding, Joe Biden decided to give a 10-minute phone interview to the New York Times. In that interview, he assured the New York Times he knew and approved every pardon or act of clemency throughout his presidency, especially at the end. Now, the fact of the matter is he almost certainly did not know about everyone. It would have been almost impossible because at the end of his presidency, Biden preemptively pardoned his son, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Liz Cheney, his brothers and sisters. He probably knew about those. But he also offered clemency to over 4,000 people, including a judge that took kickbacks to send kids to reform school and some other truly awful individuals. From the Times, Mr. Biden said that he had orally granted all the pardons and commutations issued at the end of his term, calling President Trump and other Republicans liars for claiming his aides had used the autopen to do so without his authorization. Quote, "I made every decision," Mr. Biden said in a phone interview on Thursday, asserting that he had his staff use an autopen replicating his signature on the clemency warrants because we're talking about a whole lot of people. That part is true. This is Biden's first post-presidency interview since he went on The View in May. That was an unmitigated disaster. And there was a clear reason for Biden to do that interview. It was in the books about his mental decline started to come out. Now the question, and this is a real question, what is Team Biden trying to get in front of this time? With us now, George Will, NewsNation senior political contributor, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist. You have been in Washington far longer than I am. Neither of us believe in coincidences. Why call the New York Times about this one issue now?
Why did he take care to personally sign one of these? And that was Hunter Biden's. Did he have some doubt as to whether there was legal ambiguity about whether he can outsource this to a machine? That's an interesting question, but all this is about the astonishing fact that we're trying to figure out at what point did he not know what he was talking about.
By calling the New York Times and saying this, they must think or know there are coming questions, perhaps about the autopen, but also his mental acuity. Whether or not the judge who took kickbacks to send kids to reform school, I think he should die in jail, but that's beside the point. The real point here is, how does this affect Anthony Fauci, General Milley, Liz Cheney, his brother and sister, and others? Are they trying to get ahead of what from the Trump administration?
Hard to speculate, but you used the magic name here, Anthony Fauci. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, who had really contentious hearings during the pandemic with the witness being Anthony Fauci, has re-asked the Justice Department to investigate whether Fauci intentionally misled Congress, which is a crime. Fauci emphatically and repeatedly said that he did not fund, and the nation was not through him involved in gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab. Gain-of-function research takes viruses and makes them more transmissible and more deadly. There are reasons for doing that, but the question was, this came up in the context of the lab leak theory, which Fauci was vehement in denying, and which now to most of us seems like the most plausible explanation. So that's one person who, should they say that these auto-penned pardons, clemencies, whatever you say, aren't valid, is instantly in legal jeopardy.
So are we going to be in a situation where it's perfectly possible that the former president of the United States is called to testify about which pardons he knew about? You're laughing, but...
No, the legal hurdles to getting an ex-president up there, I don't know the legal law of this. I'm not sure there is any established law on whether executive privilege can be invoked by the chief executive himself after he's no longer the chief executive. That's just a sample of the litigation that we'd be facing.
This brings up a different, and I think very compelling point, which relates to what did Biden know, when did he know it, and when did he stop knowing what was happening? That was the point that Donald Trump made when asked about this. Take a listen.
We were run by an autopen and nobody knows who used it. I think it's one of the biggest scandals in the history of our country. We were run by an autopen. Nobody has any idea who used it, including Biden. He doesn't know. saw that interview yesterday. You knew nothing.
Is this something Republicans should go after? And if so, other than the pardons, is this executive orders? What else can they attack?
Clearly, the 25th Amendment, which is supposed to solve the problem of an incapacitated president, didn't work here, because making the 25th Amendment work requires the cooperation of his colleagues, his cabinet.
His appointed.
Exactly, exactly. Now, the question, therefore, is this. Let me give you an example. Readers of my column on the 2nd of November, 2022, less than 2 years into his presidency, learned the following. When he was trying to forgive, in one of the biggest expenditures in American history, $430 billion of student loans, he summoned into the Oval Office some young people to celebrate this. And he said, I barely got it passed by just a few votes. There were no votes. It wasn't passed. It was a unilateral president action. Well, if he didn't know that he had done this, who did it?
Right. And then the question becomes, is it valid? There is this issue of the preemptive pardons, and maybe we're mixing issues here. But if Republicans attack the preemptive pardons, even the one of Hunter Biden, which is certainly possible, but the autopen ones secondarily, does this not open the Pandora's box for Trump especially, who may preemptively pardon members of his family, members of his cabinet, himself and others, if there were to be a Democrat elected as president, number one? But number two, if effectively we say whatever a past president did, what is it, a court can now rule they didn't have the mental acuity can do it after they have left office, do bills then suddenly become, that laws that were passed and signed become null and void?
Interesting question. Mr. Biden said to the New York Times, and this is right, he said, Mr. Trump is vindictive. Now, Mr. Trump has advertised that he's vindictive. He says, I'm out for vengeance. I am your vengeance, he'd tell crowds. They're coming after you, I'm standing, all of that. So there is a worry about the presidential motives. But do we really want to get into this banana republic, third world kind of presidency where an administration immediately begins to prosecute its predecessors? I think not.
Dangerous place to be. And also dangerous that the New York Times sort of just accepted President Biden's statements rather than sort of look at all of these other issues. As you point out, I point out, there is a reason that he gave this interview. Mr. Will, good to see you, sir.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.